Anyone on the dental team associated with that patient encounter or billing practice can also be held accountable.
Welcome to the Compliant AF podcast, where healthcare compliance isn't just a checklist, it's a competitive advantage.
I'm Amy Wood, CEO of Copperpenny Consulting, a cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance geek who thinks encryption is awesome.
And I'm Kelley, CEO of Clinical HR, fractional HR business partner and HR nerd who is weirdly passionate about employment policy.
If you're a dental or healthcare leader who's tired of check-the-box compliance and wants to actually understand what the rules are and how to build a practice that doesn't live in fear of audits or lawsuits,
you are in the right place. We are digging into the stuff that keeps practice leaders up at night.
We'll break down the boring, call out the BS, and share real strategies with a little snark and a whole lot of caffeine.
This isn't legal advice. We are not your lawyers.
We are two consultants who have seen way too many practices get in trouble because no one explained the rules in a way that actually made sense or made them care.
But since this is a compliance podcast, the content in this podcast or any associated clips is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal, financial, medical, tax, or regulatory advice. We are not attorneys. Clinical HR LLC and Copperpenny Consulting LLC are not legal firms, and listening to this podcast does not create a client relationship. Always consult a qualified professional advisor for guidance specific to your situation.
So buckle up, because boring compliance just got compliant AF. Welcome to today's episode. Kara and I are here today with my very dear friend, Dilaine Gloege, and we are going to talk today about documentation as it pertains to billing and coding. And I know that is not a sexy topic, but trust me, it is so important and so misunderstood. So I'm very much looking forward to this. And just like Kara and I talk about HR all the time, Dilaine and I talk about all the things that happen behind the scenes, because it turns out all this regulations, safety, compliance stuff, it all goes hand in hand with each other.
Documentation is a hot topic, though, Amy. Seriously, it's really, really hot 5 years later when the jury has to hear it.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for inviting me to join you today. And you're so correct on that, Kara. 5 years from now, when a patient brings you into a court of law because you didn't document that you addressed their periodontal disease, maybe you did, but you didn't document, then all you have is your documentation. So it is super important. And it's an area of compliance that is very overlooked in the dental practice. We think of coding and documentation and billing to be all about the reimbursement, and it's really not. It's about ensuring quality patient care.
Why do you think that's so overlooked, though?
I think they think of it as just insurance codes, billing those codes, but actually our codes, no matter the code set we're utilizing, whether it be CDT, CPT, or ICD-10-CM, they all have the same purpose. It's to populate the patient's healthcare record accurately. So if it's a CDT code, it's intended to populate the patient's healthcare record, documenting the dental services we deliver. That's what the real purpose is. But they're also utilized to gain reimbursement by filing a claim to an insurance payer.
And what is CDT for those of us who are not insurance people?
So CDT stands for Current Dental Terminology, and it is the code set under HIPAA that's recognized as the industry standard to document those dental procedures, just like your current procedural terminology, CPT.
That damn HIPAA, just every time. It just pops up over and over, and there's always something new in it. And now I have a question about CDT codes.
Sure.
So you see these news stories everywhere where they say there's crazy codes in there, like alligator bite, second offense or second attempt or something. And are there any codes like that in dentistry that just seem like really obscure?
So yes and no, not in CDT, which is the dental procedure code set. However, across healthcare, all healthcare providers and facilities utilize ICD-10-CM code set, which is the diagnosis code set. That's where you find all those crazy codes. And I love to find those crazy codes and use them in my presentation. Alligator bites.
What's your favorite?
I think the shark bites, because I am on the code. So I utilize that a lot. Just, funny little stories, and it's fun. But there's a lot of them. Of course, that's not the primary reason you would provide treatment, but it helps tell the story of, why the procedure is necessary first, and maybe the condition of the tooth, but how did the tooth get in that position? How did the tooth get into that condition? And part of that story is what happened in that trauma. Was it an alligator bite or a sharp bite, or did you fall in the kitchen? Were you standing or are you sitting? So it gets pretty crazy, but it is part of the story, even though it would never be those kinds of codes would never be a primary reason for the dental treatment. It is fun though.
They care if you were standing or sitting. That's interesting. I love it. I
I
mean,
mean,
HR, I love it. Documentation.
Right?
But
right. I mean, it gets really specific, and that leads me into specificity. That's where we're lacking in our documentation, no matter the code set that you're utilizing. In dentistry, historically, we've not been as thorough in our chart notes as our colleagues in medicine. We're behind. And now we're being held accountable for that level of specificity that either we weren't taught in school or we got out of school and began our practice and just, stopped documenting like that. We got used to these template notes, and templated notes can be a problem if you don't go back and edit it to be specific to the patient, specific to their condition. It has to have specificity. And that's what's causing the problems is lack of that specificity.
and who is that on? Is that something the doctor, obviously their license is responsible for that, but is that in the dental practice on the doctor? Is it on the hygienist as a provider? Is it on the assistants? Who's responsible for making sure that those codes are accurate, that those stories that you're sharing with the insurance company are clear and well documented?
The treating doctor is ultimately responsible to ensure accuracy in our documentation. However, any dental team member associated with that patient encounter also has a responsibility. And that's where we have to remember to work together as a team to ensure that the patient record is accurate. Sometimes life in a dental practice day to day, it gets very busy, and it's all we can do to put one foot in front of the other. But we have the opportunity to have multiple eyes on our documentation. And if one team member feels like there's something missing, we should be able to have that conversation because it's all about ensuring quality patient care. But yes, the treating doctor is ultimately responsible to ensure that accuracy. And even the person answering the phone, taking that trauma call, if you fall in your kitchen, you're going to call your dental practice if you've got a broken front tooth. And the person answering the call is going to get your symptoms, what's wrong, what happened, how it happened, everything that's needed to justify and support ordering radiographs when you come in, treatment plan, treatment provided, and everything you need to have your claim paid or adjudicated. And when the patient comes in, they're not panicked anymore. And, well, why should I repeat myself to the clinical team? I've already told somebody. So even the person answering the phone has that responsibility to make sure all the information that was relayed over that initial phone call is relayed to the clinical team so that it can be incorporated into the clinical note. And we just don't realize that. And everybody on the dental team has that role and responsibility. It really doesn't matter what you do. And that's where we are as healthcare providers and part of the whole team.
I have a follow-up question to that about AI and how that is either helping or hindering. But first, we did not ask, and we generally are kind of averse to so tell us about your story. Tell us about how you got started. What interested, we feel like that's dull and done to death. But we do want you to share what makes you the expert at this. What is it that you have in your background, or what is it that you have as far as your training? What kind of certifications and CE that you take? What makes you the person that knows the most about this? What makes you the expert?
So I have a love for it to start with. I'm very passionate. I've been in dentistry 38 years. Absolutely love dentistry. I was a clinical team member and then was intrigued by the business side of dentistry early on, particularly in the areas of coding and insurance. So I eventually became practice administrator in a very progressive dental practice. We were entering chart notes in computer software, Unix-based computer software in the mid-90s. So that's how progressed we were. And um,
Ooh,
we did
I
not
just got
know
shivers.
the terms chartless or paperless. Those terms really didn't exist, but it was something new, and we used Unix-based software and entered chart notes. So I was always intrigued by that. And insurance and billing is a puzzle. And in 2014, I was invited to join Dr. Charles Blair. I worked alongside Dr. Charles Blair with Insurance Solutions newsletter and Practice Booster for a 7-year period. And we shared a common passion for helping dentists. And at first he said, it's a few coding questions, and I got into it. And it wasn't long before I said, no, these are administration questions. They have trouble and challenges getting claims adjudicated and denials and understanding PPOs. And that's where my love for coding and billing came in. And for 7 years, I helped develop a lot of the resources, the original resources for a Practice Booster today. So that was a fun period of time. And I co-authored a lot with my colleague, Glenda Hood, and I cannot give her enough credit, helping dentists, learn to file medical. And I'm a certified professional coder from AAPC as well. So I just love it. I eat, sleep, and breathe it. And I love Medicare. I know that's crazy, but I do.
Blasphemy, Dilaine. People don't say that out loud.
I love Medicare, and I love solving the challenges that dental teams face. So that's that's where I am today. And I serve as a legal analyst for Justin Withrow, a dental focused attorney. And, I get to help dentists on a broader scale because they find themselves in an insurance payer audit, and I get to help them. And I really enjoy helping. And that's why I took on that additional role.
The organization you said that you were certified through, and what does that stand for? The
The,
AAPC.
the American Academy of Professional Coders.
Okay, perfect. And what is that? Can you share a little bit about that organization and why that makes them like the leading organization for the certification?
So they are recognized across healthcare as the ones who provide the education and certifications. And they have different types of certifications. And the one for me is Certified Professional Coder. And I've been certified since 2018, I believe. And I've always filed medical claims in dentistry since we started years ago for dental trauma, because a lot of medical plans, they do have dental trauma benefits embedded in them. And a lot of patients don't even realize that. So I had been filing medical for years. And then when Glenda and I worked alongside Dr. Charles Blair to published his medical dental cross-coding manual. We tried to simplify that process because it can be overwhelming, but it's really not hard. But I love the AAPC organization and all the education that they bring to healthcare.
Would it be fair to say that if somebody were wanting to go take a training on this, that they should take it from somebody who is certified through AAPC?
I would say yes, because sometimes we fail to understand the coding guidelines, and that's across the board with all code sets. There are guidelines. So, using the codes to populate the patient healthcare record and the file claims doesn't just fall under HIPAA with documentation and filing those claims. Because it falls under HIPAA, we're required to follow these guidelines. And we often are told, oh, well, you can just use this code, just follow that. But do you know if you're following the proper coding guidelines? So for me, when I teach documentation and coding, I teach it generically. It really doesn't matter if you're filing an insurance claim or not. This is the proper way to code. These are the guidelines, and this is how you populate the patient's health record.
This is
So
the standard it will be held to if it's ever investigated or audited or makes it to court.
yes, absolutely. And that is the standard we're held to, because if you file a claim with a code and 3 years later you find yourself in an insurance payer audit, which can be brought on by one patient complaint, and your documentation does not fully support what you did and what you were paid for, then it's not going to end well and they can recoup the money.
I appreciate you going into that explanation for us. I
Yeah.
know one of the things that I will see, not just in dentistry, I see it across the board, but people who are offering courses in dental HR, for example, and they don't have that certification. And while I completely understand that experience can certainly trump education, I feel like the people who go and invest the time and the funds and the extra training, and we all know the extra CE that goes with maintaining those certifications, are the ones that you should really be learning from if you are really looking to invest and elevate yourself.
I feel very strongly about that. And here's why, because I've been in that position as well. In dentistry, we've never had a lot or enough formal training in the areas of coding, documentation, and billing. Whereas medical, you do, because I would never apply to work as a coder in a medical office unless I was a CPC. And if I did, I would know that it would be expected for me to obtain that certification. But in dentistry, we never have. And we only know what the person before us told us in these areas. And I'm sure you guys see that as well, or what we have figured out on our own to get the claims paid. And sometimes that's not correct. And now we're being held accountable for something we may not have known. And you cannot take that lightly because of those guidelines. And this is about the audits are about receiving funds you may not have been entitled to. And unless your documentation fully supports it, then you may have just received funds you're not entitled to receive. In dentistry, we've never really had to document why we did something and justify it to the same level we're being held accountable for. We used to enter just, we did something because the patient had decay. Well, was it decay into the dentin? Was the decay limited to the enamel, or was your pulp exposed because the decay was so deep? And that's just a brief example of that specificity. And this is new to everyone in dentistry. So I see it all the time. It's because we didn't know and we were not properly trained. So yes, a certification I feel very strongly about because I know that that person is going to constantly be having to attend continuing education to stay current on the coding rules and guidelines.
Now, Dilaine, I will say I did a huge project with my team. Actually, Deanna did most of it, I'll be honest. Give credit where credit is due. So our team, mostly Deanna, put together a huge spreadsheet on what every dental board in the US requires for education. I did not see documentation or billing and coding as a required course. They were listed in optional courses, but I didn't see your category. And that just seems disingenuous because shouldn't that be a huge aspect of a practice in their ability to get paid properly, to hold up a legal healthcare record? I mean, that's essentially what it is. It's not just a dental record, it's a legal healthcare record. It's not just isolated to dentistry. Like, I know we like to think dentistry is just kind of an island of its own, but then we have, a bridge to the mainland medical whenever we want it. But that's a terrible analogy, but um, it but it's true. I see this in a lot of ways. Like, we want to bill medical when it suits us, but we like to kind of be isolated in dentistry as much as possible.
So
How do you feel about that?
you just brought up several things that I address
Great.
every time I speak. With the state board, you're correct. It's usually not listed as a required continuing education until you get audited by an insurance payer. And that insurance payer, if that insurance payer at the end of the audit, you may, write them a check for any amount they find that your documentation didn't support for what you were paid for. But they can also, if there's any potential fraud, waste, and abuse happening that they feel like is in that practice or that doctor, they can turn that case over to the state dental board, and not just the OIG, not just your state attorney general or other governmental authorities, but the state dental board. It's at that point when the state investigates from an insurance payer coding and billing and documentation perspective, then they require it as corrective action. So that's
Oh,
when it's
interesting.
required. And you're right. It seems to me that state dental boards could require it to maintain their license. But we do see that at the end of an audit when they're turned over to the state dental board.
You mean we're saying the state dental boards are not proactive, they're reactive? What?
Well, not necessarily, but maybe.
Maybe a little bit. You know, they have a lot on their plates too. We can't be too harsh. But I mean, I can tell you when I first started trying to do continuing education units, I was doing just California because I had no intention of going national at that point. That was way back in 2013. It took me 10 months of back and forth with the California Dental Board to get accepted as like an authorized educator with a license for it and everything. And I still have to maintain that for certain courses. But they did not have HIPAA listed anywhere in their listings. They had OSHA, they had infection control, they had all these other things. And I'm not picking on California. This is true with a lot of dental boards. And their role as a dental board is so incredibly important because they're upholding these standards. But I think a lot of them, like, there's no playbook for a dental board to just say, these are all the things that you have to do, and these are all the requirements. Every state has kind of their own choices when it comes to that. So it makes it very disjointed overall when you're going state to state to state. So yeah, it took me 10 months to get them to add HIPAA as a core education aspect for the dental board. So it's
Well,
still not a required course, but I mean, like in my world, HIPAA's been around almost 30 years now, and you would think that that would be listed alongside OSHA, but yeah, no. So it's not a surprise that yours is missing too.
and when I'm asked about documentation, well, I'm following and I've documented the requirements of my state dental board. My response is always, that's never enough. Doing the bare minimum that's required by your licensing board is never going to be enough. You should exceed that expectation.
Mhm.
It's a floor, not a ceiling.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially when we're talking about a clinical note. That's just the bare minimum that's required, but that's never going to be enough. And you also hit on something else, Amy. We're healthcare providers. We cannot pick and choose when we want to be recognized as a critical member of the patient's overall healthcare team. And sometimes in dentistry, that's what we're doing. Oh, we're just dentists. And like you said, we're on an island over here by ourselves.
I
And
hate that line.
it's not. I mean, it's we're healthcare providers, and along with that, all of these rules and regulations, just like HR and OSHA and HIPAA, billing and coding and documentation, it all applies. So now we're finding ourselves, okay, here we are. Now we're being held accountable. Now we've got
Yeah.
to do something about it. So it's better to reach out to someone to review your documentation and your coding and billing practices and be proactive. Identify some, problem areas and address them. Train your team. And that's where we don't invest in training of our team. And what I teach is for the entire team.
I want to circle back to what we were talking about earlier with the front desk, since you've mentioned team, the front desk taking notes and clinical notes, and then being kind of in a canned format that we have used for years and isn't really working so much anymore. How does AI play a role in this now? Like, how can we use this safely between the two of you? I'm sure we're going to get a lovely response to this, safely and effectively, to where we can capture what we need for these claims to be supported to keep us out of trouble without it being more of a problem.
Well, first, if a practice tells me when I ask, how many of you are using AI in your practice? And very few hands go up. My next response is, you probably are. Someone in your practice is
Mhm.
using AI and you don't know it. So, regardless of whether you realize you're using AI or not, you've got to have a policy, just like your HIPAA
Several.
policy. You've got to have
Yeah.
a policy and how you're going to utilize it, who's going to oversee it, and you've got to have patient transparency. So even for practices who think, oh, I haven't invested in that AI technology yet, somebody in your practice is utilizing it because somebody got excited about Chat GPT and copied and pasted the chart note to get a great narrative to get a claim paid. And guess what? A narrative's not legal documentation of that patient encounter. So that narrative that
Oh,
was generated by AI may or may not be accurate. So somebody with actual knowledge has to look at that and make sure it's accurate. And we're all excited about AI. I love AI, and I've been following it in healthcare, especially medical coding and billing, for a while now, long before it was the buzzword in dentistry. And it's not new to dentistry, it's been here for a while, but we're jumping in a little too quickly, in my opinion,
mm.
without having the training, the policies written and enforced, and the patient transparency. And I think we need to slow down a little bit.
Now, when we're talking about AI, I know a lot of people are using ChatGPT to generate narratives and things like that. But what about the diagnostic type of AI that is giving you this diagnosis that you're supposed to be coding? What about the note takers like Plod that is capturing what's being said and turning that into a narrative coding structure, whatever it is that they have it doing?
So it doesn't take the place of the need for someone who was part of that patient encounter to review it for accuracy, because it's not always accurate. Just like um, we're all human, well, AI is only going to be able to do what it's been trained to do. And somebody needs to still have that expertise to look at that chart note to make sure it's accurate. And we use AI to detect disease. We don't use it to diagnose it. It's never going to take the place of the clinician's professional clinical judgment. And we forget that sometimes. We get excited because I know a lot of practitioners who don't agree with AI's detection of disease or where it is. So it does not relieve the provider responsibility, and we can't assume that. We just have to slow down. And I think we're moving a little too fast, jumping on board, and we don't have policy.
Dentistry is known to do that. Whenever something new and fancy and shiny and sparkly comes out,
Oh,
they're
boy.
like, "Ooh, I want that." So I got a fun story for y'all. See, I say y'all once in a while too. Even my Midwestern roots still have it. So I have a long, long, long time client, and I'm sure she'll listen to this and laugh hysterically. Her office manager and I joke that her office number and her cell phone number and her email must be written in the bathroom stall of every salesperson in dentistry ever, because she's always looking at something new. She wants like when I first started working there, they had 15 vendor integrations into their practice management system. And I've gotten it down to a lot less than that just by consolidation and changing things and modifications. But that was kind of the other thing I wanted to add on to what you were saying, Dilaine, is the vendors have AI too. And AI has been around since the mid 1900s, for those of us old enough to know what the 1900s were. Uh, be kind to those born in the 1900s. Our joints hurt,
That's right.
okay? um, but what I'm finding is these vendors have been utilizing certain forms of AI for many, many years. It just wasn't called that. It was called machine learning and computers and technology. And it's just kind of morphed into things that only businesses had access to. And now what we're seeing, especially in dentistry and just society at large, is we now have something that is free and widely available. We have several options that are widely available to the general consumer, and they're being irresponsibly used
You're so
within a
and
business setting.
that's what I was thinking. I love AI, and it's great if you can use it for narratives or clean up your chart notes. Use it with responsibility,
Yeah.
because you've got to have those policies. You've got to know how to use it, and you've got to use it correctly. You're still going to have the need, in my opinion, in my area, There's a greater need now for well-trained team members to be experts, because if AI is going to flag a claim before it gets to the payer, that there may be a code that's utilized that's not supported by your chart note. There's got to be somebody that knows more than AI that flagged that to determine if AI was correct or not, before that claim is sent. So to me, it's creating a greater need for the education that I provide in these areas. So I'm all for it, but use it responsibly. That's a good message.
100%.
Well, and I'm sure Amy could go down a complete rabbit hole on the tech side of like what use it responsibly looks like. I do want to ask, though, one thing you mentioned was on the patient side, that patients should be aware of that.
Yes.
And that's where, like Amy had mentioned, vendors have been using this forever. Patients are probably not aware of that. But what does that look like when we say use it responsibly and making the patients aware that it's being used? And I'll just throw one example in here. The conversation I've been having the last couple of weeks with a couple of my clients when we're doing employee handbook policies is we are now having to add AI glasses and wearable technology to their policies when it comes to personal
Interesting.
devices. And there are some potential use cases where it may be permissible, may be a beneficial thing, but when and how do we make the patient aware of that? Is that something that's acceptable? Where does that draw the line into HIPAA? What problems does that create for coding? What can y'all share about that?
Oh, I can share. So a couple things. If we utilize AI to assist us in creation of our chart note, we need to be making that statement at the bottom of the chart note, whatever AI platform was used to assist in creating this clinical note. It was not used and does not affect the professional clinical judgment of the provider. It has been reviewed for accuracy. And there needs to be some kind of statement like that. And I have a couple of examples that I use in teaching, but we need something like that. And we need something in our chart note. AI was used to detect periodontal disease, not diagnose, but full disclosure in that clinical note, especially if you're utilizing it to create your chart note. And then the other side of that is in May, the American Medical Association came out with a statement about patient transparency. So, what's coming with that for us across healthcare, including dentistry, is you're probably going to have an AI policy in the near future where you have it listed on your website for the patients, and it's going to be part of the patient intake. Patients need to be assured that you're using AI, yes. How are you using it? Who's overseeing it? And they need to be assured that it's not taking the place of their doctor's diagnosis and treatment plan.
You just got Amy like super excited.
I'm thrilled with things like this because I look at that as when there's no guidance or recommendations or written requirements on this, people just go rogue and they do whatever the frickety frack they want. And it's the wild, wild west. And I see this all the time. When I was doing IT, there was no minimum standard to be an IT provider. There's no licensing to be an IT provider. And when we're dealing with these businesses, these healthcare businesses, just because they're not medical does not mean that they don't have to have the same standards across the board. And we're seeing this with vendors right now. There was a case that was publicized month, 2 months ago, something like that, where a very large DSO was being sued by a patient using old wiretapping laws because the phone tree system did not say that they were using AI for phone recording, for transcription, and so I just got a thing with my phone provider last week saying that we have to have something in our greeting that now says that, or immediately after with one of their automated add-ons. So, I mean, the companies are starting to get wise to this, but it's always reactively. So we want to be proactive as much as we can, knowing this is going to be a problem. We
Well,
want to be compliant AF before it's a compliance requirement. We want to be secure.
And with the understanding that we are probably regulatory wise never going to be ahead again. Like it
No.
is advancing so quickly. There's just no way that our legislatures can keep up. There's no way that some
No.
of the dental boards could keep up. No way some of the medical boards or the coding boards or whoever is in charge
They
of.
don't understand it. I
No.
mean, I'm remembering that C-SPAN video where Mark Zuckerberg had to go and explain how the internet works to a bunch of people in Congress. And that is exactly what it's like. It's so brutal trying to explain things to people that don't understand the basics of this. And when it changes so fast, it's hard to keep up with it. So that's why I think it's crucial that you work with people that are staying up on top of this.
Another interesting fact is that some malpractice carriers are updating their policies. And so
Yeah.
dentists need to look toward their malpractice carrier for guidance on use of AI to ensure that you're covered when you're using AI in your practice. So some of them have very specific guidelines already. So they're catching up. But again, we're moving faster than all of those agencies can in healthcare and other businesses and, industries as well, but specifically healthcare because technology is just moving really fast.
I considered myself not just an IT provider. It was more of a solutions architect because, back in the days we were moving Windows XP to Windows 7. That was a beast to do that because they were two entirely different systems and not everything would work. And we're in the middle of that right now with Windows 10 to Windows 11 and everybody's freaking out and I don't want to spend the money on new computers. And I actually had someone randomly contact me through a really old contact and said, "Do I really have to do this?" And I was like, "Well, how old are your computers?" And they're like, "Well, but can't I do this stopgap?" And I'm like, "Dude, your computers are 5 years old. You already bought them under like spec, what they should have been. Just, bite the bullet. Like, is this a you're being cheap thing or is this I just really don't want to do it or I don't understand why I need to do it?" And he's like, "No, it's not an I'm cheap thing. I'm willing to put the money toward it. I don't fully understand why." And so I went through the why because I, as an expert, much like you guys, know it 10 layers deeper and know how to explain it to people in a way that they can understand and accept and embrace. So when it comes to what you do, Dilaine, I think it's so important for people to hear your message and what you're doing and the weird stuff you run into because I'm sure you've got stories. I know you can't tell a lot of them, but can you tell us the strangest thing you've dealt with? Or
Um,
the most interesting?
I guess seeing an LOL in a chart note and
Oh.
the doctor signing the chart note. What did that tell me? It told me a lot. It told me that
Oof.
a team member somewhere along the way, nobody invested in that team member. It also told me that the practice didn't have an SOP and part of the onboarding for what documentation looks like in their practice. It just told me we failed that team member. It did not reflect, in my opinion, poorly on the team member in her role. We failed that team member, and that saddened me. But what it also told me is that doctor was just going through their sign and chart notes. Did the
Wow.
doctor really review it? And that's where we are in dentistry, and we've got to slow down, even if it's just taking the time to review what's in our chart note. And you know, I see a lot of grammatical and spelling errors in chart notes, and all of that compromises the integrity of the note. It compromises the integrity of the doctor and the integrity of the practice as a whole. So we've got to pay attention. And I've seen LOL in chart notes more than one occasion. So, it's knowing what's appropriate. You stick to the facts about the clinical encounter when you talk about a clinical note. And yes, it's great to know that they're going to Disney next month, but it doesn't belong in the clinical note because that does not affect treatment. It had nothing to do about the clinical aspect. You just stick to the facts. And
They could put that in an internal note.
Right.
That's why that box exists, is for personal conversations so that you can remember that and have that connection with the patient.
And relationship building is important, but you need to find another place to put it. You just have to remember who can read that. What it
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I was talking with a malpractice attorney about a year ago, and at that point, he had dealt with an incident where the practice had labeled the patient a PITA, a pain in the you know what. And that was the deciding factor in that malpractice case, where they said you're not ethical toward your patients, you're not accurate in your documentation, and you're just plain rude. So, how do we know that any of the rest of this is true and accurate, and whether it happened or not when you're calling your patient a pain in the butt?
And that's where you still have to be what you write in an internal note, because patient, if you don't want it read out loud, you don't write it. You have to be super careful. And back in the day, I'll be honest, that term, the that was used a lot in the 80s and early 90s. And I look back on some of that we did, and I think, oh my goodness, we really did say that about patients and label patients. Well, you know, like you said, that looks like we're not treating every patient the same, and every patient deserves quality health care. And when we do things like that, we don't think about what that may look like from a patient perspective or an outsider reading that note, because you're telling the story in that patient record, and you've got to tell it accurately. And
Do you remember the days when they had the paper charts
yeah,
and they had the HIV sticker on the
oh, yeah,
outside of it?
that's what we did, but we know better now.
Yeah, I mean, I tell people how I met my husband was I was a nanny for a dentist, and he brought a unencrypted copy of the PracticeWorks database to the house so the doctor could finish up notes after hours. Now, obviously, that was 2004. That was cutting edge technology back then. But we don't do that now because we know better. And so that's a case where the technology catches up with the times and the recommendations and security and, all these other things. Um, I love what you do. I love everything that you talk about. You're just very practical and no nonsense about it, but you're also really passionate. So what would be the one thing that gives you sleepless nights and drives you to do better and not quite swear at people, because you don't do that? I will do that on your behalf. I'm happy to do that. But sweet Dilaine won't say it out loud. uh, what drives that passion that really upsets you when people don't do correctly?
So when they are under scrutiny, either an investigation or a payer audit, and I go in and I train them to do better and to improve, and they still don't take it seriously. You know, a payer audit is nothing to not take seriously. You have to take it all seriously. And if you get a letter that says special investigator or audit, you need to stop what you're doing and call for help. Um, because you have to take it seriously. But when you don't take it seriously, and you receive the training to correct your ways, and then you still don't, and you continue not to invest in training for your team, that's really frustrating for me. And it makes me very sad, because these dentists have worked long and hard to be a licensed healthcare provider. You know, it's your livelihood, and you have to be willing to change. And it's not investing in your team and investing in proper training and proper coding and billing resources, which is not Facebook and Google. Those are not proper coding and billing resources, period.
You mean our Facebook groups are not like the number one best source of information for all things
Right.
compliance?
And it's always
What?
correct, right? But I've been saying that for years. Facebook, Google, and the office upstairs are not reliable coding and billing resources. But failure to invest in all of that can be problematic. And when you've already had been under the microscope and scrutinized, and then you still don't invest in it, it's not an expense. It's in the wrong column. It's an investment in your license, your livelihood, and the future of your practice. But we all have the same common goal. Everything that you guys do and I do and at the practice level is to ensure quality patient care. So it really doesn't matter our role in dentistry or healthcare in general. That's our common goal, right? So we need to take everything that we do, even if we think it's just answering the phone, we need to take it seriously. It matters in quality patient care.
So I know we're close to the end of our time today, and I'm sure we will have you back to continue this because I'm pretty sure this could go on for like another 6
Oh, it
hours.
could.
We'll get the snark out of her eventually.
But just to kind of wrap up for today, I do have one more question, and it's probably a one with broad answers here. What happens if they don't? What happens whenever they don't do this? What kind of consequences? Is this something that's just a slap on the wrist from insurance companies, slap on the wrist from the dental board? Is this a criminal thing? Like, what is the average or maybe worst case that can happen if they don't take this seriously?
It could be a matter of a few $1,000s in recoupment from an insurance payer all the way to jail time. It can be criminal, it can be civil, and everything in between. And the monetary piece of it can really be significant, multiple six figures. And that can sink a practice. And why take the risk? You know, I may be called conservative sometimes with my teachings, but I stay out of the gray areas and I teach my doctors to do the same. And, we can't walk that fine line all the time because sometimes we walk that fine line and we go over a little too far and we fall off that line. And it's just not worth the risk. You've got continuation of care, continuity of care for our patients is so important. But I mean, it can destroy a practice, a family. It can be very devastating. And one patient complaint is all it takes. One grievance followed by a patient. You need to take it seriously.
And is this whenever you're talking about these consequences, jail time, which does sound fairly severe, this is on the doctor, correct? This
On
is
the
not
treating doctor,
the treating doctor. Okay. This is not the
he
assistants that didn't do it right. This isn't the front desk.
It can be. So anyone on the dental team associated with that patient encounter or billing practice can also be held accountable. And we're seeing a little bit more of that. Ultimately, it rests on the treating doctor, whether it be an associate or an owner dentist, the treating doctor. But that's what dental teams fail to realize is anyone on the dental team associated with that patient encounter or billing can also be held accountable along with the treating doctor. So it's not meant to scare anyone. It's just
Yikes.
something that they need to know. We all have a role and we have a responsibility. So that's where I start. Responsibility to ensure accuracy in our documentation. But if our documentation fails to support what we're doing or is inaccurate, any member of the dental team can also be held accountable for that inaccuracy. The patient and the subscriber as well. They too can be held accountable. So,
And I'm going to assume that just like with everything else that we do, ignorance is not an excuse. Like I
right,
know in
you
my
should
world,
have
ignorance
known.
is not an excuse to the IRS, the Department of Labor's.
Right.
You can't just, the doctor who owns the practice can't just say, well, I didn't know. I didn't know that's what they were doing.
That's right. They say, well, you should have known. Well, what research did you do to ensure that coding practice was correct? What resources did you invest in? What seminars did you invest in to send you and your team to? Those
Say, look at
questions
that.
are going to be asked, and you need to have a reliable answer, and Facebook's not one.
The Facebook groups are not one of them.
No, they're not. I see a lot on Facebook groups that's inaccurate. Every time someone gives coding advice on Facebook, they're giving legal advice, so be very careful.
What's the most common one that you see that's incorrect? Like if you could say one more time for the people in the back, this is not right. What would that be?
Can someone give me their narratives to get every crown paid by a payer?
I see
Your
that all the
narrative
time.
My answer is the clinical note, because a narrative is not a legal documentation. And just because you've used this narrative 100 times and every crown is paid, Is it specific to that patient? Is it supported by your clinical note? And that sends my blood pressure through the roof because I see it all the time. And the answer is simple: the clinical note. That's your narrative.
People suck sometimes because that just seems like a lazy person's way of trying to do their job.
And they're just trying to get their claim paid. And I understand that. But you've
Yeah.
got to understand that if you put a narrative on a claim that doesn't is not specific to that patient's condition and why you're doing it or what you're doing, then you may have caused the practice and the doctor to receive reimbursement he or she is not entitled to because you were a go-getter. Oh, well, my claim rejection and denial rate is it's non-existent because all my narratives get paid, for example. I hear that. Well, are you being paid accurately? Accurate coding, accurate documentation equals accurate reimbursement. And my goal is for you to file accurate claims. You know, all plans, all dental plans and medical plans have a design. They have limitations and exclusions. And that's the patient's plan, but you still have to file it accurately. So you may not be paid based on a limitation. And I'm not going to give you a generic narrative to get your claim paid. And I always say, if you're here for me to tell you and teach you how to apply the correct diagnosis code every single time to get the claim paid, you asked the wrong gal because that's not what I could teach you how to get every claim paid, but it wouldn't be appropriate.
Yeah, you're going to teach them to do it right.
That's correct.
What are the statute limitations for them to be concerned about if somebody's coming into audit or for patients to make
Good
complaints?
question. So typically you're going to see 3 years, but you can see 6 years too. 10 years.
Mm.
Medicare Advantage requires you to maintain patient records for 10 years. And that is longer than most state record retention laws. So I had in 2014, I guess I had a call. They needed a code for an overdenture that was applicable in 2006. I said, what? 2006? Well, in 2006, they had filed a code for a full denture, meaning the patient had no teeth, no roots in that arch whatsoever. Well, the patient had 2 root tips remaining, and in 2014, they had those 2 root tips removed and a claim was filed. So they were searching and they had to pay back money from 2006 because they filed the wrong code, and then they had to refile it with the correct code from 2006, and due to timely filing, they weren't paid. So, you know, that wasn't an investigation or an audit, but yet it kind of was because that claim in 2014, it prompted the payer to realize, oh, well, we've already paid for an overdenture. And that was in 2000, a complete denture in 2006. And there were no teeth present then. Well, there were 2 root tips. So, you know,
Interesting.
generally it's 3 years, can be 6 years, but you need to know that Medicare Advantage and Medicare requires record retention for 10 years. So it depends on the case.
Well, and at the bare
Yeah.
minimum, even if, like you said, it's not somebody coming in and specifically auditing, that's a lot of time for your team to spend doing documentation again or chasing documentation or
Yeah.
looking up old records or going, back in the database to figure out what happened because you're not going to remember that 6 years later, what really
Right.
happened. And
And,
so
and
it takes enough time for the team to do it once. Why not limit it to just the one time?
right.
Right.
And I want to be clear on your question. Every state has state insurance laws and recoupment laws, but not every plan is required to follow state laws. Self-funded and federal plans are not required to follow state insurance laws. So the recoupment laws in a state don't apply to self-funded that fall under ERISA or federal plans. So that's where the confusion lies. Your state may say XYZ for recoupment or an audit, and it can go back only so many years. But if it's a Medicare Advantage, the door's wide open.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, we're a bucket full of fun, aren't we?
I love compliance. Thank you.
Actually, we are. We are a lot of fun. We have a blast together, and at the end of the day, all we want to do is make practices know the risks and give them solutions on how to be compliant AF.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for letting me share my passion today.
Well, thank you for joining us as our first guest. Yay! We were so excited to have you.
I was excited to be asked and honored. Thank you.
Dilaine, if people have any questions, any of our listeners have any questions, how can they reach you? Or do you have like a website or an email or something that you're willing to share?
Absolutely. My website is tidewaterdentalconsulting.com, and you can contact me through my website. And I look forward to hearing from you with any questions. I'm happy to give you some direction.
Thank you, Dilaine.